Oh, you. You're no hollow, hmm? Thank goodness. You are a godsend to come at this moment.
Welcome back everyone to a lore episode that we've been building up to for a long time. I am Silvermont, or just Alex, and I hope you're all doing fine and getting used to the new YouTube Google Plus layout. I mentioned it in comments, but I thought I'd just quickly throw it in at the start of the video. So if you comment on YouTube videos, please go into your Google Plus accounts and change your settings so that anyone can reply to your posts. Otherwise, if you ask me a question, I can't reply to it. That has happened a lot the past few weeks, unfortunately. Anyway, thought I'd just mention that, but that's enough about YouTube Google Plus nonsense. Let's get on to today's topic. You might call him the poster boy of Dark Souls. He's a character everybody meets at least once, and his armor is perhaps the most recognizable thing in Dark Souls. Why, of course, it can only be the Knight of the Undead Asylum, Oscar of Astora. Now, typically I would start with a brief analysis of the character's name, and we'll get to that soon, but first I thought I'd explain just why he's known as Oscar, because he never tells us his name in-game, and in the credits he is simply the Knight of the Undead Asylum. However, thanks to the marvels of cut content, people have found out dialogue that's been recorded for our doomed knight, and left in the game files. I must point out, I didn't find any of that stuff myself. I wouldn't have the first clue where to begin. That said, people have perused the game data and extracted all of this information, which includes that he was intended to play a far larger role, and that he was indeed known as Oscar. What was this role, and why was it cut? That is what we're here to find out. So, let's start with his name and then what we know of Oscar from the actual game content, shall we? It's a tough name to find the exact origins and meanings of, but the two most common sources seem to be either Irish Gaelic or Scandinavian. If we look at the Irish version, then it could mean dear friend, deer as in the animal, os for deer, cara for friend, and then the Scandinavian version, literally, God spear, divine spear, spear of the gods, and so forth. Does this have any real bearing on his character? Unlikely, but it's always important to know what a character's name means. What is interesting to note is that the characters from Astora do not seem to share a name scheme. Solaire obviously has connotations of sunlight and solar energy. Anastasia, or Anastasia, is quite a common name, and interestingly enough means resurrection, of Greek origin. And then we have Oscar, but now that we know some possible meanings of his name, let's move on to his actual role in the game. Oscar is the very first NPC we meet in the game, during the opening cutscene no less. So, from above our cell he throws us down a corpse with a key on, allowing us to escape our cell. He doesn't say anything to us, just gives us a small nod. Next up we find our saviour crushed and broken, behind a hidden wall. Now, after giving us what is essentially our first objective in the game, he dies and we see nothing more of him, unless we return to the asylum, where we find him hollowed, and can lay him to rest forever. That's about the limit of his exposure in the main game, so let's break down each point before we move on to the cut content. So, he saves us from our cell, but why? That is up for you to decide. Remember, Dark Souls is a role-playing game, it's not Call of Duty. Is your character a bandit who was caught and sent to the Undead Asylum? Or were you the daughter of a powerful lord, trained at the Dragon School until the Dark Sign was found upon your body? Or perhaps a low-ranking knight, a wanderer, or merely a sellsword? Maybe Oscar was a childhood friend of yours in your own game, who knows? If you want to roleplay that, sure, no one's going to stop you. But most likely, the knight spied us and realised we were no hollow, despite our kind of hollow appearance, and set us free simply out of kindness. Or maybe he hoped we would distract the hollows and demons long enough for him to proceed and escape. After all, we do know a certain demon is watching the exit. And just what was he doing up there? Why was he at the Undead Asylum? I can come up with two possible answers to that. First up, he was locked away, just as we were, but managed to escape of his own power. No doubt he is undead and bears the dark sign, but we also know that he was likely a high-ranking knight, so it's possible he escaped being imprisoned. So the second possibility is that Oscar came to the Undead Asylum of his own volition. Now, why would you do that? That wasn't a rhetorical question, I was asking you, why would you go to the Undead Asylum? for the doll, for a Titanite slab. If you've watched my Priscilla video, you will know that she was originally going to play a much larger role. Maybe Oscar was looking for the key to the painted world, so he could find Priscilla, and learn from her the art of life hunt. What do you think? Why was Oscar at the asylum? At any rate, he is there, and he does save us. Next time we meet him, however, he's been defeated. The first time I ever played Dark Souls, I had actually thought the boulder I avoided had crushed him instead, because I didn't really realise it wasn't at the right angle for that or anything. I had assumed he'd been smashed by the boulder or the wall as it was broken by the boulder. Second time I played, however, actually it was kind of the same playthrough, just on New Game Plus, I realised that the light shining down on him was a very likely clue, and all you have to do is look up, and all the pieces fall into place. There's a hole above Oscar, and he's lying on a bed of bricks. He was up on the roof when he saved us. And who else do we know that is up on the roof, or at least up high? Why, the asylum demon, who jumps down to prevent us from escaping, presumably. So it's very likely that Oscar was smashed through the roof by the demon, and we know that club it holds kinda hurts. So what about his dialogue? Well, there aren't many people in Dark Souls who tell you what to do, but Oscar is one of them. He gives you a clue and a hint as to what you must do. When you ring the Bell of Awakening, you will know the fate of the undead. This of course refers to Frampt, who will give us further guidance once we ring both bells. This is Oscar's mission, which he has failed. He exclaims that he will die soon and then lose his sanity, so he knows that he's about to turn hollow. But we know that not everyone turns hollow after dying just once, right? Or is that the case? As the player, we half hollow every time we die, but we still retain our sanity, and we never actually turn full hollow, unless you give up playing, of course. Lynn killed Siegmeyer at least once, and he wasn't hollow at the time, so it's possible that Oscar has died a number of times, and he can feel, deep down he knows this is the final one. Or it's also possible that this is his first real death, and the trauma of it is going to turn him hollow. And yet, he's very calm. He's resigned to his fate, and there's no fear in his voice, at least not to my ears. We know not how competent he was, but he was brave if nothing else. A kind man too, no doubt. Even as he lies dying, he worries about us, asking us to leave him, lest he harm us after his death. Not only does he give us 2 keys, but also the Estus Flask. Indeed, Oscar enables us on our quest. The torch is passed from one undead to another. I believe that handing us his Estus Flask was a very significant gesture. Think about how important your Estus Flask is. Would you be willing to part with it? To give it to another player and lose it forever? Indeed, he's the very picture of a true knight. What other equipment does our knight wear? Well, the elite knight set, the crest shield, and the Astora's straight sword. We can assume that the straight sword, which is basically a divine longsword, was common amongst the high-ranking knights, along with the knight set itself, and the only unique thing each knight had was his or her shield. Now, not every knight, but the high-ranking knights would most certainly have their own shields, and this is actually quite accurate. Knights typically customized, if you want to call it that, yet their shields more than anything else. The shield would have the crest of their house upon it. Indeed, the Astora straight sword is found on a corpse close by the dragon crest shield. So this was likely another elite knight of Astora, and Oscar drops us the crest shield, and we can assume the crest on it is the crest of his own house. The armor is interesting, because it is more or less references Oscar directly. Armor of a nameless knight, perhaps an elite knight of Astora, based on the fire-warding heraldic symbol on its blue surcoat. Although he was loath to give up on his undead mission, he perished at the Undead Asylum and went hollow. And yet we find that armor in Darkroot. It is possible that the description is referring to Oscar, because the sight of another knight wearing the same armor made our chosen undead think of Oscar. At least, that is my thinking. I do not believe the armor was unique to him. especially if you consider that Rickard is wearing the very same set. And you also have to consider that perhaps you were originally going to find that armor on Oscar's body after you kill him when you return to the Undead Asylum. But this brings us to the cut content of the game. So, at some point, Oscar was intended not to die, but rather to survive and be your penultimate challenge in the kiln of the first flame. How do we know this? Why? By cut dialogue. After escaping, we would first meet him at some point before Anor Londo, where he would greet us, introduce himself as Oscar, thank us for giving us, well, for ringing the bell, and mention that he's spoken with Frampt. Later on, we could find him in Darkroot, probably by the entrance near the secret bonfire, because he mentions the fierce band of thieves, likely the Forest Hunter NPCs. Now, he asks us if we want to help him clear them out, so we can both make it to the grave of Sir Artorius. And this is important, because if he would succeed at this, it would mean Oscar also defeats the Four Kings, and has a chance to speak with not only Frampt, but Kaathe. After helping him in Darkroot, we wouldn't see him again until probably the end of the game, either in the kiln of the first flame, or in the chamber that houses the Lord Vessel. He would challenge us. I like to think that once the doors opened after feeding the Lord Vessel all the souls, Oscar would be waiting on the other side for us, but it's more likely that he was waiting for us to open the door. And it's also likely that he didn't actually defeat any of the, the lords, because, including the Four Kings, because you have to consider that he seems to be in our world, and doesn't come from his own world like, say, Solaire does. But you can't be sure, maybe he does have his own version of the world, but who knows. Either way, he would fight us. If you side with Frampt, he sides with Kaathe, and if you side with Kaathe, he would have joined Frampt. If we join Frampt, he exclaims we are a foolish slave of the gods, and that he will kill us, and become the true Dark Lord. Yet, if we join with Kaathe, he remarks that we are a pawn of the Darkstalker, and that fate has commanded him to destroy the Dark Lord, us. Now, this is so very interesting. You might remember that I've in the past compared Lautrec and Solaire to the player in their actions, and I feel that Oscar is very much the same. He was a mirror, designed to show us the consequences of our actions, and through him, it would seem that no matter what option we choose, we are indeed being manipulated by either serpent in the end, leaving a remarkably sour note at the end of the game. But that was all cut, and you are free to think what you will. Will the Link the Fire ending really lead humanity to another golden age of good stuff? Or was becoming the Dark Lord beneficial to everyone in the end, save the gods? Or was Kaathe simply manipulating us, even if he states that the serpents are now yours to command? And what of poor Oscar? He, much like us, is a chess piece, being moved by powers greater than he knows, all the while thinking he is in control. But just why was this content cut? One could assume that it was because of scripting errors or some such, or that they didn't want NPCs out in the world fighting, but then Siegmeyer can fight several enemies too. So was he cut because of time? Or was he cut because his story just didn't work with the game? Perhaps that answer is out there, but I've been unable to find it. Maybe they thought Oscar's story was too close to Solaire's, but it is impossible to know for certain. What we do know is that the Serpents didn't just manipulate Oscar, they manipulated us, me, you, every player who first met them. We were all manipulated by these Serpents. They were indeed intended to manipulate Oscar, a mirror to our player. But why? The Serpents have their hands, or lack thereof, in everything. What are they scheming? What is their endgame? What is it Frampt and Kaathe truly desire? And how can we forget that serpents are a symbol of the undead and imperfect dragons? And happy Thanksgiving to all you Americans out there. Feel free to send me pumpkin pie, 'cause I've never had it and it looks good. I want it.